On the night between Monday and Tuesday this past week, Ukrainian drones traveled nearly 930 miles, almost 1,500 kilometers, deep into Russian territory, and set one of Russia's most important petrochemical complexes on fire, a facility so significant that it represented the very last major gasoline producer in the entire country that Ukraine hadn't already managed to hit throughout this entire year. And the reaction inside Russia wasn't calm, measured, or confident. It was panic, playing out in real time, from fuel shortages spreading across entire regions to Vladimir Putin himself suddenly appearing in military uniform on state television, desperately trying to convince his own country that everything remained firmly under his control. Let me walk you through exactly how Ukraine pulled off this specific strike, and why it represents such a devastating escalation in a drone campaign that's been quietly reshaping this entire war. Here's exactly what happened. Overnight between July 13th and 14th, 2026, Ukrainian forces struck one of Russia's largest petrochemical complexes, a facility called Gazprom Neftekhimia Salavat, located in Russia's Republic of Bashkortostan, deep inside Russian territory, roughly 930 miles from the Ukrainian border. Ukrainian monitoring channels published video showing the immediate aftermath, and Russian independent outlet Astra, citing eyewitness footage, confirmed multiple explosions and a massive plume of black smoke rising from the facility. Ukraine's own general staff formally confirmed involvement in the strike. And here's exactly why this particular target mattered so much more than just another burning refinery. According to Vyacheslav Shiryaev, an economic analyst tracking Russia's energy infrastructure throughout this war, the Salavat complex represented the very last major gasoline producer inside Russia that hadn't already been struck by Ukrainian forces at some point during 2026. Every other comparable facility had already been hit. This was the final one still standing, and it fell too. To understand why that specific fact matters so much, you need to understand the actual scale of what this single facility produces. Gazprom Neftekhim Salavat processed 7.2 million metric tons of raw materials back in 2024, representing roughly 2.7% of Russia's entire national refining capacity, churning out gasoline, diesel fuel, kerosene, liquefied petroleum gases, and a range of other petrochemical products, essential to keeping both Russia's civilian economy and its military logistics running. This wasn't some minor, symbolic target Ukraine picked purely for the dramatic value of hitting something deep inside Russia. This was a facility responsible for a meaningful slice of the fuel actually keeping Russian vehicles, both civilian and military, running every single day. Bashkortostan's regional head, Radi Kabirov, confirmed the attack publicly, describing it as a drone raid on what he called the Salavat industrial zone, and claiming Russian forces had successfully repelled the assault, attributing the fires that broke out to debris from downed drones rather than to direct hits. That's a pretty standard pattern you'll notice throughout Russian official statements covering these Ukrainian strikes, always downplaying the actual damage, always framing the attack as having been successfully defended against, even while independent footage and eyewitness accounts tell a very different, much more dramatic story. Now, here's where this single strike connects to something much bigger, because Salavat wasn't some isolated one-off event. It was simply the latest, deepest entry in a drone campaign that has been steadily escalating throughout this entire year, and the numbers behind that broader campaign are honestly staggering once you actually see them laid out together. According to Ukraine's own unmanned systems forces, deep strikes into Russian operational and strategic territory increased by an almost unbelievable 150% during 2026 compared to previous levels. Commander Robert Brovdy, who goes by the call sign Madyar, put the philosophy behind this entire campaign in blunt, memorable terms, stating that there's no longer a safe rear for what he called the occupier, meaning there's no longer any part of Russian territory Ukrainian forces consider too deep, too distant, or too well protected to actually strike. Just last month alone, Ukraine's drone forces carried out 2,359 separate deep strike missions, defined specifically as operations targeting locations between 500 and 2,000 kilometers inside Russian territory, successfully hitting 172 separate military, industrial, and fuel and energy facilities. On top of that, they conducted another 3,406 middle strike missions, covering targets between 150 and 300 kilometers away, striking 1,682 additional targets, plus 2,747 front strike missions, covering the 25 to 150 kilometer range closer to the actual front lines, resulting in another 1,265 targets hit or destroyed. Add all of those numbers together, and you get a picture of an absolutely relentless, sustained campaign hitting well over 3,000 individual targets in a single month alone, spanning everything from targets just behind the front lines all the way to facilities deep inside Russia's strategic heartland. And this campaign hasn't just been hitting oil refineries either, even though fuel infrastructure has clearly become one of its central priorities. Ukrainian forces have specifically targeted the Kronstadt naval base, a key basing point for Russia's navy, along with the Navy's own 15th Arsenal facility and a corvette called the Boykai. They've struck space communication centers at Dubna, Skolkovo, and Medvezhye Ozero, locations connected to Russia's satellite and space-based command infrastructure. Ukraine's own security service separately claimed responsibility for attacking 7 Russian aircraft sitting on the ground in occupied Crimea. And in a detail that genuinely shows just how deep this campaign has managed to penetrate, Ukrainian forces have reportedly opened what analysts describe as an actual corridor for strikes, reaching all the way to Moscow itself, while separately disabling a key power substation in Sevastopol. Here's exactly what's been driving Russia's growing panic throughout all of this, and it comes down almost entirely to fuel. According to reporting from ABC News, Ukraine has been successfully hitting oil refineries, broader energy infrastructure, and defense industry facilities deep inside Russia on an almost daily basis at this point, as its long-range drone campaign has continued expanding throughout the year. The consequences of that sustained pressure are now becoming genuinely visible in the everyday lives of ordinary Russian citizens. Many Russian regions are currently suffering serious fuel shortages, with people filming themselves stuck waiting in extended lines at gas stations, footage that's been circulating widely and painting an increasingly uncomfortable picture of a country whose energy supply is visibly straining under sustained pressure. In occupied Crimea specifically, the situation has become severe enough that local authorities have formally declared a state of emergency over fuel shortages and have imposed curfews amid ongoing power outages directly caused by Ukrainian strikes on the peninsula's infrastructure. Think about the psychological weight of that kind of visible, everyday disruption for a moment. This isn't some abstract military statistic buried in a defense ministry report somewhere. This is ordinary Russian citizens, standing in genuinely long lines at their local gas station, filming it themselves and sharing that footage, whether they intend it as protest or simply as documentation of their own daily frustration. Where that used to feel distant, confined entirely to frontline combat zones hundreds of miles from any major Russian population center, is now something Russians are experiencing directly in the form of empty pumps and curfews imposed specifically because of Ukrainian drone strikes. And Vladimir Putin himself has clearly felt the pressure building underneath all of this too. According to reporting covering this exact period, Putin made what was described as a rare appearance in military uniform, visiting what was described as a supposed military position, in an effort specifically designed to signal that he still had the entire war firmly under control. Notice the careful, almost skeptical language embedded in how that appearance was actually reported, a supposed military position, rather than simply confirming it as a genuine, verified frontline visit. That kind of skepticism from observers covering this story tells you something important about how these carefully staged, made-for-television moments of strength are increasingly being scrutinized and questioned, rather than simply accepted at face value the way they might have been earlier in this war. The scale of the human cost from Ukraine's broader drone campaign, and from Russia's own retaliatory strikes happening at the exact same time, has continued climbing too. Just days ago, on July 18th, 8 people were killed and more than 60 others wounded in Russia by overnight Ukrainian drone attacks, according to Russian officials themselves. Photos released by the governor of the Moscow region showed a residential building damaged during that specific attack, in a town called Elektrostal, sitting inside the greater Moscow region itself, not some remote border area, hundreds of miles from Russia's capital. Kyiv's forces have continued what's been described as a relentless aerial campaign against both energy infrastructure and military targets deep inside Russia, specifically aimed at undermining Moscow's broader war effort and making ordinary Russian citizens genuinely feel the consequences of an invasion that is now well into its 5th year. Defense analysts studying this entire campaign have offered some genuinely fascinating insight into exactly how Ukraine managed to dramatically accelerate its long-range strike capability throughout this specific year. According to Bob Tallist, a research fellow in land warfare at the Royal United Services Institute, a respected London-based defense think tank, 2 specific factors have driven this acceleration. First, a concerted, sustained effort from Ukrainian forces to boost their own drone production while simultaneously improving inertial navigation systems, onboard software, and machine vision technology, all specifically designed to keep these drones flying accurately, even when Russian forces attempt to jam their satellite navigation systems along the way. Second, continued foreign support for Ukraine has clearly played a meaningful role too. And Tallist made a particularly sharp observation about exactly why oil refineries and fuel terminals specifically have become such effective, repeatable targets, noting simply that these facilities are enormous, sprawling physical targets, which makes them significantly harder for even sophisticated Russian air defense systems to fully protect compared to smaller, more easily concealed military assets. This entire drone campaign has become significant enough that it's actually reshaping how NATO itself thinks about future military investment, which genuinely tells you something about how seriously Western defense planners are taking what Ukraine has managed to demonstrate throughout this war. According to detailed reporting, defense experts and strategists now describe Ukraine's drone campaign as genuinely pivotal in helping stall Russia's broader military momentum on the battlefield, cutting off crucial fuel supplies and disrupting military deliveries in ways that have placed sustained mounting pressure directly on Vladimir Putin's own leadership. At the same time, those same analysts have raised a serious, ongoing warning worth taking seriously, that Kyiv's continued deep strike successes have dramatically raised the overall risk of escalation in this already brutal war, a genuine tension between a campaign that's clearly working operationally and the very real danger that pushing this hard, this deep into Russian territory could eventually provoke an even more severe response from Moscow than what we've already seen throughout this conflict. That tension between operational success and escalation risk is actually reshaping concrete military spending decisions right now in real time. NATO has reportedly been pushed toward a $40 billion counter-drone investment plan, a direct response to watching exactly how effective Ukraine's drone playbook has proven to be against a nuclear-armed, conventionally powerful adversary like Russia. Think about the significance of that shift for a moment. NATO's own defense investment thinking, historically built around massive, expensive platforms like fighter jets, tanks, and traditional air defense systems, is now being meaningfully reoriented, specifically because of what a comparatively smaller, resource-constrained country has managed to demonstrate using relatively low-cost, mass-produced drone technology instead. Russia hasn't simply been sitting back and absorbing all of this damage without attempting to respond either, and it's worth being fair about that side of the story too. Russia's FSB security service claimed just last week that it had foiled a series of large-scale Ukrainian drone attacks, specifically targeting 2 military air bases deep inside Russian territory, at Shagol in Chelyabinsk region and Ukrainka in Amur region. According to that FSB statement, Ukrainian secret services had allegedly attempted to use balloons and drones to smuggle containers full of smaller drones into Russia's western Bryansk region, planning to eventually transport them onward to those 2 specific target bases, and the FSB claimed the individuals allegedly involved had already been arrested. That foiled operation, according to reporting, closely resembled an earlier, extremely successful 2025 Ukrainian attack on Russian military air bases, including that exact same Ukrainka facility, an operation the United States has estimated destroyed around 10 Russian aircraft on the ground. Notice what that specific historical reference actually tells you about the ongoing nature of this entire campaign. Ukraine isn't simply hitting Russian oil refineries in isolation. It has previously demonstrated the capability to strike deep inside Russia and destroy actual military aircraft sitting on the ground at their own bases, using smuggled drones transported by balloon deep into Russian territory before ever being deployed against their final targets. Whether or not this most recent attempt was genuinely foiled exactly as the FSB claims, or whether that statement itself represents another layer of Russian information management specifically designed to reassure their own domestic audience, the underlying capability Ukraine has already proven it possesses remains genuinely alarming from Moscow's perspective either way. So when you step back and look at the complete picture painted by everything we've walked through together, the deepest strike of the entire war, landing on Russia's last untouched major gasoline producer, a documented 11-fold increase in deep strikes throughout 2026, thousands of individual targets hit across every single range category in just the past month alone, fuel shortages and curfews spreading across Russian territory and occupied Crimea, Putin himself staging a rare uniform appearance specifically to Project Control, and NATO reorienting a $40 billion investment plan directly in response to what it's watching Ukraine accomplish. You start to understand exactly why the reaction inside Russia to strikes like this one genuinely deserves to be described as panic rather than simply routine wartime inconvenience. This is a country that entered this war believing its own strategic depth, its sheer physical size, and the enormous distance separating its own heartland from any active front line would keep its core infrastructure genuinely safe from direct attack. Nearly 930 miles is an enormous distance, roughly the same as flying from New York City almost all the way to Denver. And Ukrainian drones reached that distance anyway, found one of Russia's last remaining untouched major fuel production facilities, and set it ablaze, adding one more name to an already staggering list of oil refineries, naval bases, space communication centers, and military aircraft that Ukraine has managed to strike successfully throughout this single year alone. That's the real story, hiding underneath a single burning petrochemical plant in a region of Russia most people watching this war have probably never even heard of before. It's not really a story about one specific strike, however deep or however symbolically significant that particular target happened to be. It's a story about an entire strategic assumption Russia built its wartime confidence around, that its own vast size and distance would keep it fundamentally safe from this kind of sustained direct pressure, quietly and steadily collapsing, refinery by refinery, naval base by naval base, month after month, until ordinary Russian citizens found themselves standing in gas station lines filming their own frustration, and their own president found himself putting on a uniform for the cameras, trying to convince an increasingly uneasy country that everything genuinely remained under control. If this breakdown of exactly how deep Ukraine's drone campaign has actually managed to reach into Russian territory genuinely surprised you, drop a comment below and let me know which specific target in this story caught you most off guard. Because honestly, when you actually see the full list, naval bases, space communication centers, Russia's last untouched refinery, all hit within the same general campaign, it becomes pretty clear why this war looks completely different from the way it started more than 4 years ago. And if you made it all the way through this one with me, share it with someone who still thinks this war has stayed confined mostly to trenches along the front line. Because as this story shows, the real battlefield now stretches nearly 1,000 miles deep into Russia's own strategic heartland. We'll keep tracking exactly how far this drone campaign continues reaching in the months ahead, so stick around, because based on everything we just walked through, Ukraine clearly isn't done finding new targets deep inside Russian territory.